Okay, let's talk about a set of materials that have basically become the new oil. They are the absolute bedrock of our entire high-tech world. We're not just talking about commodities anymore. We're talking about rare earth elements, a class of strategic assets that now define who has industrial power and who has national security. So, let's dive right in.
This was said decades ago by China's paramount leader Deng Xiaoping, and it just perfectly captures the strategic foresight that was at play here. This wasn't some accidental market position. It was a declaration of long-term intent, and it tells you everything you need to know about the sheer scale of this resource's importance.
So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll get into what makes these materials a new kind of geopolitical asset. Then, we'll unpack China's long-game strategy. After that, we'll pinpoint the supply chain's real choke point, cover the global response that's ramping up, and finally, map out some future scenarios.
All right, so let's start with the basics. What are we actually talking about when we say rare earths are a new geopolitical asset? What does that even mean?
Okay, so these 17 elements are basically the secret sauce in almost every piece of advanced technology we have. But here's the critical point. They've transformed from just being industrial materials into becoming powerful tools of geopolitical leverage. Access to them isn't just about price anymore. If you want to build, say, a cutting-edge F-35 fighter jet, you're not just buying materials. You're trying to navigate a really complex geopolitical map that's pretty much controlled by one dominant player.
So, how did we even get here? I mean, this situation didn't just happen overnight. It's really the calculated result of a deliberate, multi-decade strategy that was designed to create a global dependency.
This number right here, this number tells the whole story. China controls over 80% of the world's rare earth refining and processing capacity. That structural imbalance isn't just an industrial problem. It has morphed into a massive strategic vulnerability for pretty much the rest of the world.
And this concept really explains what that vulnerability means. Experts are now calling this control over the supply chain a non-kinetic strategic weapon. Just think about that. Imagine a trade dispute where, instead of tariffs, the supply of materials for a country's entire defense and EV industry just gets turned off. You could cripple an opponent's most advanced systems without ever firing a single shot. That's the power we're talking about. So let's really get into the mechanics of this control. How exactly does this leverage get applied? Because it's not as simple as just owning the mines.
Right, and this clears up a huge misconception. The real power isn't in digging the raw ore out of the ground. Countries like the US and Australia, they have plenty of reserves. The true strategic high ground, the real choke point, is in the processing. And this isn't just simple filtering. We're talking about super complex chemical processes to separate 17 different elements that are all bonded together. It's incredibly expensive, it's technically very difficult, and it's an environmental nightmare to manage at scale. And in that arena, China has a near-total monopoly.
And who depends on this processed material? Well, everyone. We're talking about the absolute heart of modern industry and defense. From the guidance systems in Tomahawk missiles to the high-performance magnets inside every single EV motor and offshore wind turbine, this dependency is baked into the most vital sectors of the entire global economy.
So who are the players trying to build an alternative? For investors, the universe here is pretty small, but it's very strategic. You've got Australia's Linus Rare Earths, which is currently the only major processor outside of China. Then there's MP Materials in the US, and they are racing to build out their own domestic processing. And then you have more specialized explorers like Apia, focusing on what are called heavy rare earths. Those are the scarcest and most valuable ones, the ones critical for things like missile defense.
This brings us to the global response, because faced with this massive choke point, allied nations are now scrambling to build parallel, secure supply chains basically from scratch.
And the response is coming from multiple angles. It involves high-level strategic alliances, like the Quad coordinating their policies. It involves direct government investment and support through big legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act, trying to de-risk these huge capital projects. And it involves a big push for innovation, in everything from recycling old electronics to exploring entirely new sources.
But let's be really clear, this is a monumental challenge. We're not talking about some quick fix. Building these alternative supply chains is, at a minimum, a 5 to 10-year journey. And it comes at a cost. Because of stricter environmental and labor standards, Western supply chains are probably going to operate at a 30 to 50% price premium. This is a long-term, very expensive, but strategic necessity.
So with all that as context, where does this all go? Let's walk through 3 potential future scenarios for the global rare earth market.
Okay, the first and maybe the most likely scenario is a permanent split.
We would see two parallel supply chains and tech ecosystems emerge, one aligned with the West, the other with China. And this means higher costs for everybody, and it could lead to different, incompatible technologies, kind of like the early days of different phone chargers, but on a global industrial scale.
Now, a more optimistic path is strategic cooperation. This wouldn't be a return to the old free-for-all, but a new system of managed trade with really clear rules, verification, and transparency. Think of it less like a free market and more like international arms control treaties, but for critical materials. It's definitely possible, but it would require a major de-escalation of the tensions we see today.
And the third scenario is all about pure market forces, a strategic retreat. If this global effort to build alternative supply chains is successful enough, China's market dominance could simply erode away. And at that point, the geopolitical leverage just vanishes. And the economic cost of using export controls as a weapon would be way higher than any potential benefit.
So what are the key takeaways from all this? First, geopolitical risk isn't a footnote anymore. It's a fundamental part of valuation, period. Companies have to urgently map their supply chains to figure out their real exposure. Building relationships with alternative suppliers right now, even if it costs more, is a critical insurance policy. And from an investment angle, you should probably expect sustained valuation premiums for those key non-Chinese players and just be prepared for those 5 to 10-year timelines.
And this brings us to the one question that you really need to be asking, whether you're managing a company or a portfolio. Is your supply chain a secure asset, or is it a hidden strategic liability?
And that question matters because access to these materials has fundamentally shifted. It's no longer just a line item on a balance sheet. It is now a core component of both national and corporate security. This is not financial advice.